We are going to move into a power talk session. We have 3 10-minute power talks for you before lunch. Water for nature. We're going to bring up Jason, Janice, and Geronimo. Coming on up. Jason's going to kick us off. It is doubtful that we will have time for any questions after these fantastic presentations, but we do have a lunch hour coming up so we can socialize and ask questions after that. So Jason, when you are ready.
Yeah. Thanks, Megan. So I'm Jason Weiner. I'm a senior hydrologist at Environmental Science Associates. I also volunteer with the FloodMar Network on the Instream Flows Action Team, and I'm going to present some work that that team has been working on, mostly focusing on the question of how do we balance water available for recharge benefits with in-stream flow needs. Just quick acknowledgement, the In-Stream Flow Action Team is a broad coalition of all volunteers. I'm a volunteer myself. Michael was a volunteer. So this is all people donating their time in addition to their day jobs. This is our side hustle. So focal topics for today, really, when I think about flood managed aquifer recharge, 2 things come to mind: water availability, where, when, how much water is available, and then kind of the topic for today, how do we balance the benefits of aquifer recharge with in-stream flows? You can't decouple this from, managing those groundwater resources, but I think we've, had lots of other talks that talk about that. So just kind of setting a stage, I want to just note there's lots of different types of FloodMar projects. For each of those different types of projects, there's different approaches and goals, and there's different ways that kind of the flow in-stream, the science of in-stream flows and environmental flows intersects with each of those projects. So I think each of these has been kind of covered, but we've got like wet season permits through the state board, nature-based solutions, what Janice is going to talk about, the flood recharge diversions, which was the subject of the last panel, and kind of these broader watershed scale, multi-benefit reservoir reoperation and infrastructure improvement projects. And I think the watershed studies that, Jim and his team, Karen Dev, have been working on are a great example of that. I'm really going to focus on just these wet season permits. That's what the team has been focused on. And so the goal of the team was to kind of put forward a case study. We've taken a multi-benefit approach, multi-objective approach, where we're kind of looking at 2 primary objectives here. So this is just a theoretical plot. On the bottom x-axis is an index of FloodMar benefit, how much water is available. On the y-axis is an in-stream flow kind of alteration benefit. And this is rescaled here to be 1 minus a penalty, just for kind of clarity. And so those are kind of the 2 things we're trying to look at. And the idea here is that you would develop a bunch of different diversion scenarios. And for each of those diversion scenarios, you would be able to quantify each of these 2 metrics and sort of develop a Pareto curve. If you are a proponent of these projects, on the bottom axis, you might have a threshold where your cost-benefit analysis, doesn't work, so you need to achieve a certain FloodMar benefit. And if you're a regulator, you might not want to approve a project that has a certain amount of penalty to the stream. So you'd be able to rule out some of these, and you'd be able to pick one that works best for everybody. So in terms of looking at the diversion scenarios for our case study, we're including the 90-20 approach that the state board has developed and is kind of embedded in the statutes there, and then these alternative diversion criteria, and these can be based on existing in-stream flow or eco-hydraulic studies, minimum flow requirements, and also just broadly based on environmental flow science. And so for environmental flow science, we're really trying to leverage work that's been done for the California Environmental Flows framework. It's a broad coalition of academics, NGOs, scientists, consultants, state agencies. The idea there being that California has a fairly, unique natural flow regime. Lots of components of that flow regime are providing environmental benefit. If we can quantify those components of the flow regime and sort of preserve them or avoid alteration to them, we're protecting our ecosystem resources. So for us, we're basically developing a diversion scenario where we have an input hydrology and we have different diversion approaches. We step through the historical record, and for each day we calculate the water available and the impact to the unimpaired flow. And so we're kind of pilot testing this right now. We're using the Scott River, as I've been working on that site for a little while. Laura Foglia presented on it yesterday. And so we're looking at 4 different diversion scenarios. So one is just that 90 percentile, 20% method, and then 3 other alternative diversion scenarios. So there was some ecohydraulic studies that were done in that system that identified a sort of minimum protective flow for the river. That diversion threshold is 362 CFS. Below that, we presume that there's minimal impacts during the wet season to the fishery resources in the Scott. And so above that, we're assuming that water can be diverted. We have a 20% max cap on daily diversions based on the full natural flow, and that's to be consistent with the 90-20 method, and also preserves some of the natural variability of the system. And then we have 2 other approaches that are based on the California Environmental Flow Framework, where we have diversion thresholds set to the wet season median, and these also are intended to preserve some key events that flow through the system, including certain flood events. There's an optional option in there to include the 20% on that method. This is just a graphic kind of presenting a single water year of what would happen for one of the functional flow options. So dark gray is the actual hydrograph. The dashed orange line is the hydrograph after diversions based on this functional flow approach, and the kind of blue bars are just showing water that's available. So really quick, just some results for our first kind of objective, which is water availability. On the right, you have just box plots showing for the 84 years of simulation how much water is available each water year for the different scenarios. So the orange is sort of this ecohydraulic based one, the blue is 90-20, the green and the kind of auburn or sienna are the 2 functional flow methods. I don't think we should take these numbers at face value. They should be kind of taken comparatively. The method is agnostic of both infrastructure available to get this water off the river. It's agnostic of other water rights. I mean, those are going to be ubiquitous no matter what approach you take. So really, these need to be taken comparatively. Notably, we just see that 90-20 provides the lowest annual average volume available. Also, about 1 in 4 years, there's no water available under that method, whereas under these other methods, you get increasing water available. So the ecohydraulic approach, you get about a little more than 2.25 with that one. And then under the functional flow methods, you do get some substantial increases. For the alteration assessment, as this is the other component that we're really interested in, we're using the California Environmental Flow Framework Appendix J, which provides basically some methods for looking at flow alteration. You're essentially calculating the various functional flow metrics for each year and trying to see if in your post-diversion flow regime, you're significantly altering the flow. This is very complex. You can come talk to me afterwards, and I'm trying to rush through, obviously. But really what we found is that based on that appendix, there was no alteration for any of the scenarios. So they were all protective, which is kind of beneficial. So we kind of were under the working assumption that 90-20 was protective. I'm glad to hear that the ecohydraulic approach, which I helped develop, is protective, and then the functional flow-based methods are also both protective. Just some key takeaways. So the 90-20 rule is the least water available. It's the least flexible for operators, but it also did have the least flow alteration. So it is really kind of achieving, I think, what it was intended to do, but it did have some sort of unintended consequences. The functional flow-based scenarios, they really maintain the natural range of wet season functional flows. So that's beneficial. And they are much more flexible than 90-20 would offer to project proponents. This 20% cap really preserves flow variability and mimics the natural dynamics of that system, which I think is important to resource managers and regulatory agencies. So that was a good lesson. I think we're moving forward. This, the Scott was just like a first test pilot of some of the numerical code that were written for this. We're continuing to work together. I think we're at a point where, we want to start soliciting more input from the community as well. We need to, explore additional functional flow scenarios. We need to do some sensitivity analysis. We've only run the model with kind of that 20% cap. I really want to explore that decision space a lot further to see if, there's other meaningful metrics associated that when we start looking at, that bivariate space of, benefit to, potential impact to the fishery or to the flow regime. I think we need to refine that in-stream flow alteration penalty. That's not something we've landed on exactly yet. We need an index value for that to really make this an important decision support tool for people out there. We're gonna kind of expand past the Scott to other watersheds. We're gonna put out a white paper, and I know that my colleagues are planning to put out implementation guidance based on CEF.
What was my time? What was my time? 9.5 minutes. Yes!
Nice, that was great.
Nice job. I'll give you that back. This is me. All right. Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Janice Weldon. I'm an eco-hydrologist with Verdantis, formerly cbec Eco-Engineering. We're kind of undergoing our brand transition now, so bear with us while we move through that. Today I'm going to be talking about our ecological floodplain inundation potential, or EcoFip tool, which we developed to assess in multi-objective floodplain restoration and rehabilitation opportunities. I'll also give a quick shout out to Michael Founds, who also helped develop this work while he was with us. So for this presentation, first I'm going to highlight some of the challenges that come with planning multi-benefit projects, which I'm sure many folks in this room are very familiar with. Then I'll move into the EcoFip methodology, and finally I'll go over some of the ways that EcoFip has been applied here in California. I'm not going to touch on the Pajaro example, but I'll thank Mark for highlighting that previously. And so, again, as I'm sure many folks are aware, there are numerous site selection and modeling considerations that come with these multi-benefit projects. Obviously, we're looking at optimizing multiple objectives, be that groundwater recharge or habitat uplift or habitat creation, flood risk reduction, et cetera. You also have to understand that you're probably working with multiple stakeholders who have different values and might weigh things differently and prioritize things differently. And of course, we want these projects to be constructible, and so we want to maximize the uplift while minimizing the cost. We're not trying to, excavate large areas that will give us not a whole lot of habitat or recharge. And then on the modeling side, this all has to be done in a way that respects the long-term hydrology of the reach that you're working in. You want it to be hydraulically and hydrologically stable. And then also, we have to design projects that account for these changes or potential changes to that hydrology, be that from climate change or upstream flow changes. And so, bear with me here, this will be hopefully the most technical slide. The EcoFip method is a 3-tiered approach. In tier 1, we're looking at large-scale inundation potential. So for this, we will take water surface elevations that we'll glean from a hydraulic model over a range of flows. We'll extend those laterally out from the river across the floodplain through physical barriers like levees. And here we're trying to understand how much inundation we could potentially achieve if that levee was no longer there. We're talking about floodplain reconnection work. Yeah, and the output to this is this height above river map, which gives an idea of, for each flow, how high above the river is the current land surface. Moving into tier 2, here's where we put more boundaries onto our flow. So we'll overlay things like parcel data or maybe just a grid to try to understand the actual benefits of inundating a particular parcel. And here's where we'll incorporate the long-term hydrologic data as well as different prioritization schemes, be that through groundwater, or we will have at this point depth and duration of inundation, which we can calculate a lot of habitat benefits from that as well. In tier 3, this is our conceptual design phase, and so here we'll actually modify the terrain and then rerun tiers 1 and 2, but only looking at the connected area to assess how much benefit a particular concept might actually achieve. Again, looking at usually groundwater or habitat uplift or habitat creation. And since this is a floodmore forum, I wanted to just briefly talk about the methods that we use to compute groundwater recharge. I think it's a little bit difficult to read, but essentially we have some kind of recharge rate that will overlay with the depth to groundwater data. This we usually get from icons. And then by combining that with our inundated area time series, you can kind of get an idea of how much recharge can happen at a particular site. For this example, we get recharge from Sorgo. However, we have used CVHM as well as the FMSJ sim model, and we're working on incorporating some of the data from Totem from Catherine's group. And so we were lucky enough to be able to apply this, to apply EcoFip throughout much of California, including on the middle San Joaquin River. This work was done in collaboration with Jenny Marr and Lori Clamaro-Chu over at DWR, as well as Deborah Bishop's team at Jacobs. And so when we ran the EcoFip tool throughout this domain, we identified a site that was a good candidate for floodplain activation. This particular site had a levee breach in 1997 and currently experiences seepage in some areas. And so at this site, we evaluated it for a combination of dedicated transitory storage recharge areas, as well as some multi-benefit areas, with the goal of alleviating flooding, increasing floodplain habitat, and increasing groundwater recharge. And so using EcoFip, we were able to rapidly iterate through 6 different concepts, looking at different breakdowns of the site in terms of dedicated recharge and transitory storage, shown in blue, and our multi-benefit area, shown in green. And so here, the blue area receives pumped flow according to a set of rules. So it receives flow anytime, or in a certain window when the San Joaquin is above 1,500 CFS, and then receives pumped flow at a rate of 200 CFS. And then the green area is our multi-benefit area. This is where we anticipate habitat uplift as well as groundwater recharge. And this is characterized by a levee setback and receives flow via a few levee degrades. Here's a closer look at our 2 multi-benefit area concepts. Concept 1 is our larger area. We're looking at about 420 acres of newly available floodplain, characterized by this large levee setback. And then for our smaller multi-benefit area, we're looking at about 130 acres of newly available floodplain. For both of these concepts, we obviously have the side channel that activates at about the 2-year flow. And then from a habitat creation perspective, we also do some floodplain grading to provide some additional habitat off of that side channel, as well as these little backwater alcoves, which can provide refugia for some smaller fish. And then in the larger multi-benefit area, we also have these little drainage channels because of the way the site slopes. We want to alleviate stranding hazards, and so we want to allow flow to kind of come back to the main channel. For these, we also considered cut-fill balances. So we were pretty much able to balance the cut material, assuming that some of it would be able to be used for the actual levee construction. And when we ran this multi-benefit areas through our EcoFip tool, we actually ran it with some smaller analysis units. These are half-mile square grid cells to kind of get an idea of where we're actually seeing some potential benefits. And so looking at the groundwater recharge, we see substantial opportunities throughout the multi-benefit area, but particularly in the side channel, which makes sense because it's going to be frequently inundated. And then looking at on the habitat side, again, most of our benefit comes within the side channel. However, we do see some of this nice upper floodplain habitat, which is incredibly valuable. And I'm showing here juvenile steelhead rearing. However, we also computed juvenile chinook rearing, shorebird habitat, and the possibility for cottonwood recruitment in this area. And the story was pretty much the same. Although folks have questions, please come talk to me. We also computed recharge just in our dedicated transitory storage area. Again, these are areas that are just going to kind of receive flow. There could be ecological benefits, although we're not calculating them, we're not banking on them. And an interesting note here is that if you look at that top row, we're not seeing a whole lot of increase in recharge, despite the fact that there's a pretty significant change in that area, or in the area of those multi-benefit areas, of those dedicated transitory storage areas, sorry. And that's because we are diversion rate limited here. So whereas in the multi-benefit area, we have these levee setbacks that kind of inundate on a natural basis. For these sites, we're only able to pump, in this case, 200 CFS, and so we're really limited by the amount of flow that we can put onto the site. And we did some sensitivity analysis with that as well that we can talk about if folks are interested. Comparatively, for the smaller multi-benefit areas, there was a correlation between the amount of recharge and the area because they're limited by the actual space and volume available. And so when we look at the total recharge across the project area, so this is the dedicated transitory storage areas in dark blue, and then the multi-benefit area in light blue, you can see that for this site we have pretty substantial opportunities for recharge and substantial opportunities for habitat creation. So at the high side, concept 1, that's a large dedicated transitory storage area and our largest multi-benefit area. We're looking at 11,000 acre feet per year. This is in an annual water year. And then also, even if we have, say, a smaller multi-benefit area or a smaller dedicated transitory storage area, we're still able to get on the order of 8,000 additional acre feet per year of recharge. So this is a very promising site. And I think also just highlights the fact that we don't necessarily have to compromise on groundwater recharge when considering habitat. And those multi-benefit areas are really punching above their weight in terms of the area that they take up and their ability to recharge, which is interesting. And I've also here just highlighted some of those assumptions. How am I doing for time? All right, cool.
Takeaways.
What's that?
Takeaways.
Perfect. I'm going to skip talking about the Castaneda River, although if folks want to talk to me about it, please do. This is really exciting work. I just wanted to highlight some of the other wonderful folks that I work with. And yeah, if folks have any questions, please come talk to me. Thank you.
Here we go. I won't hold you too long since I know I'm standing between you and lunch. I'm a biologist by training. I don't stand in front of people very often, so I'm a bit nervous. So I appreciate your patience with me.
Just pretend we're all birds.
That's a good call. Yeah, so I'm head animal Castaneda with Audubon, California. I lead our working lands program. And today I'm going to share a little bit about how we envision multi-benefit approach to bird conservation and thinking about managed aquifer recharge. And really getting this on the ground with landowners and water districts and that sort of thing. So because I'm Audubon, I love birds, think about birds all the time. And this is really what's driving kind of why Audubon is participating in these conversations in this space. We see that water birds and shorebirds, along with land birds and most of the other species have significant population declines over the last 50 years. And really what has led to that, especially for water birds, is the loss of over 95% of our freshwater wetlands throughout the Central Valley. And so here we see a graphic pre-1900s. I'm sure many of you are aware of this, you know, and then on the right we see kind of where we're at now. And so there's still some core habitat areas, like in Merced County, the Grasslands Ecological area, up in the Sacramento Valley, of course in the Delta, and then a little bit further south. And so I'm here today because to me this presents an opportunity, talking about recharge, how we move water across the landscape. A lot of these last remaining wetlands are heavily managed through groundwater pumping or diversions of surface water, either flood flows or just called upon allocations to manage this habitat that provides outstanding benefits across for all bird species. And so again, you know, we've all seen this map and are aware that the Central Valley is high priority areas for managing water and getting the most out of a little. And so as I drive across the landscape, I see a lot of recharge projects and existing areas that look like what we see on the left here. Very basic, very kind of denuded of any vegetation, not a lot of opportunity for supporting wildlife. And so how do we get from this on the left to something that provides and can provide a little bit more habitat and support migratory birds and help rebound their populations? So again, we've probably seen this kind of graphic a lot, and I really want to just highlight that managed wetlands and recharge basins often can kind of sit next to each other, or they can complement each other in a lot of different ways. And so again, how do we get from what we saw where there's this denuded recharge basin to something that has a little more benefit? And so our approach is to examine existing data sets that highlight habitat priority areas for a whole suite of species, not only birds, but a bunch of other wildlife. We look at refugia of climate for wildlife, and so we kind of stack these and prioritize them. And a handful of years ago, we did this analysis in the Lower Deer Creek watershed, which is down in the Tule subbasin, where we applied this process to help guide priority areas for where we wanted to reach out to landowners, work with irrigation districts and water districts to eventually construct some of these projects. So again, we're trying to go from this recharge on the left to this recharge on the right. And so, you know, people in the room might be asking, like, well, what are the benefits to this besides for birds? And also, how do we get there? And so it's not that complicated. Here I'm just showing you a engineering design. That's one of the biggest questions that I've received from landowners is like, how do we actually build this thing? What does that actually mean? And so pretty simply here, one of the most basic things that we can do is create topography in these basins. We can construct them with gradually sloped sides to provide access as waters enter into these basins that can provide habitat for a broad suite of species. And, you know, in theory, this is kind of like the pie in the sky vision. We know that this is not really that realistic for a bunch of reasons. But things I want to highlight here are just that the introduction of vegetation can help prevent erosion on the slopes of some of these basins. It also, we were talking about water quality earlier today. Vegetation can help support the cleaning of water and pulling out sediments and other nutrients and that sort of thing. And all at the same time, it provides that benefit for wildlife. So with that, I'll say thank you.
Thanks for the power session. We technically have 2 minutes in case anyone wants to sneak in a question. I know lunch is on the horizon. We got one. Hold on, here I come. Here, Mark.
So this question is for Audubon. I think there are lots of different reasons why you may not see as many multi-benefit recharge facilities spring up. One of those reasons is because the second you start introducing those features, species start taking hold, we have a very unfortunate regulatory environment where then that local agency becomes liable for any kind of maintenance they may need to do to support this facility, which is trying to do good, but then you essentially get penalized for trying to do more good. So I'm wondering if there are any advocacy channels that Audubon and others might be working on to help relieve these pressures, because I think we would see a lot more multi-benefit good projects if local agencies weren't viewed as developers and penalized for trying to do good.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think there are a few existing programs. So like there's a safe harbor agreements that folks can enter into to support these projects, proponents from developing management plans that say like, okay, you're doing the right thing. We know that there might be some amount of take of X amount of species. And it's just more of like an awareness and a collaboration with the agencies there. So that's one thing. And then there's also the voluntary local program that tends to lean a little more towards agricultural operations and kind of what's happening there. But, you know, that program is underutilized. And I hear that all the time from CDFW. But again, that's an opportunity to work with those natural resource agencies that focus on wildlife to find a path forward, something that works for the landowners. Because, you know, I'm also recognizing that, like, I'm coming from from a state of like, I'm not trying to cause more problems. I want to find a solution. You know, I know folks are trying to do the right thing, and so let's break down some barriers and work together.
Here I come, Graham, here I come.
Okay, I'm trying to decide how to say this. It might be construed as something between a curveball and a pain in the ass, but in the last 4 years, my students and I have published a couple of papers on closed basin hydrology and how in many of our groundwater basins, including California, because we pump them down and we're irrigating, they're closed basins. So we know what happens to a closed basin because we've seen Salty Mono Lake, Salton Sea, Great Salt Lake, Dead Sea, et cetera. The only way to reverse that, and this problem, I think a lot of people thought, well, that's a geologic timescale problem. So these geo people like Fogg and others, we will, you know, there's going to be several generations before we have to start worrying, but it's happening now. We've showed that it's happening on a half-century time scale. The salting up of the basins, which also collects nitrate and so on. The antidote to that is to fill the basin up enough that it naturally discharges, which for ecosystems would also be, in theory, the ideal state, that you're not relying on episodic reservoir releases to keep a channel wet. You're relying on the natural groundwater discharge processes that are also happen to be needed to balance out the salt in the system. So I say this is another reason for recharging, not just by floodmar, but any way you can recharge, is to store more of the water that you're trying to store underground rather than trying to store still most of it on the surface. So there's this unrecognized benefit. And for the ecosystems, I think it could change the paradigm a little bit because it means that what you're trying to do depends more on regional groundwater balance than what is happening locally around the channel, which might provide some interesting, you know, things for the imagination on how the ecosystems could look in the future. It also means that you would have to restore the system in most cases to pre-2014 conditions, which SGMA does not require, but nevertheless, this is a fact of nature. So I toss that out there because I think it might provide just some interesting consideration for what might come in the future if we happen to be lucky enough to be successful enough in floodmar and other recharge endeavors to actually fill these basins up enough that the natural discharge processes resume. And the benefits for the ecosystems, I would say, could be bigger than we're imagining now. So Jason's going to say something.
Yeah, those are great aspirational goals, Graham. And yeah, man, I think everyone would love to see that because that would mean that we've arrested so much recharge that we've reconnected our surface water to our groundwater systems. Like, it's plenty of water for everybody, us and the environment. I think the volumes that you're talking about are huge. I mean, I know it's not a closed basin, but I did a bunch of work on the Castaneda, and Jeff and others and you and everybody, you know, talked about like the volume of water needed to reconnect that system. And it's large, but not insurmountable.
But we've shown that water
Yeah. Yeah, you and Rob's study. I know, I read it. Go talk to Reclamation about updating their water control manual again after they already did. No, it's good. We need to get more water in Folsom South Canal and put it over there. And yeah, Laura and her team and Michael and Janice are working on, natural recharges in the Castlemas, and the paleo channels there are incredible vectors for recharge. I don't know what the deficit is in Tulare to, reconnect Tule and White River and the Kern that all, essentially run dry. But yeah, good aspirational goal. Let's work toward that. You're at a point in your career where you can be a pain in the ass.
Any concluding thoughts?
Let's eat lunch.
Let's see lunch. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the Water for Nature panel. Lunch is served. We're doing 50 minutes for lunch today. And that was planned.